Well, all right. Glad to see folks have made their way into the Zoom room. Thank you for joining us on this opportunity to talk about the continued development of a Better Buildings benchmarking program. Pleased to have a fair amount of the team members here from the city. Glad to see some folks and names for people that have already been engaged over the past several months on the development of this opportunity, and happy to provide an update on that and share sort of next steps as we continue to collaborate on bringing this important opportunity to fruition. So just to start right off, wanted to thank you all again for taking your time and taking this opportunity to get up to speed if you haven't been part of the discussions to date, or to hear an update and even just to continue to ask questions as we collaborate. A big thanks to some of our resources and partners over the past several years, as you'll see in a slide or two. Thanks to the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC, our partners IMT at the Institute for Market Technology, who both through the city's award as part of the Bloomberg Philanthropies American Cities Climate Challenge have been able to assist us in thinking through really targeted actions to support economic recovery and climate action. And we've been really appreciative of their partnership to date, and to other local folks, including Hawaii Energy and our utilities across Hawaiian Electric, Hawaii Gas, and BWS that have been helping to think through how they can also partner to make this a successful program. So without further ado, my name is Matt Gonzer. I have the privilege and the honor to serve as the director for the city's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. Not to make it about us, but very quickly, the voters created this office, and it really is about, I think, our local recognition of both the drivers of climate change, the costs that bears on us already today, and the opportunities and needs to drive down those costs, drive down those emissions, and prepare our communities for the impacts and results of climate change. And the office is quite young, established in 2016, rocking and rolling since the spring of 2017, really, with the first hire, the former Chief Resilience Officer. And those roles, responsibilities, and even the city's policy commitments towards climate action have since been further defined through community-based processes and other administration and city council leadership. So what we wanted to provide to you tonight is really how Mayor understands the opportunity to drive execution on climate action. He really stresses and believes that this is an important opportunity to not only spur economic recovery and economic activity as we continue to rebound from the consequences of the COVID pandemic, but also to support businesses and families in keeping expenses and costs down. And we think benchmarking is one of those triple win opportunities on economics, cost savings, but also climate action. And we're here to talk more about that with you. So I'm pleased to introduce Ben Sullivan, who is our Energy Program Manager, and he'll kick us off with some logistics. I'll jump back on to provide some context, and then Ben will take us away on more of the specifics of the draft proposal.
Thanks, Matt. Happy to be here tonight. And thanks everybody for joining the call. It's really, really great to be here. My name is Ben Sullivan. I'm the Energy Program Manager for the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. And I'm happy to say this is, I think, about month 8 on the job. I came over from 10 years over at Kauai County and really enjoying working with the team and working with folks around the city. So just put up our agenda for today. This is a conversation that we've been having quite a bit with a lot of stakeholders over the last few months. And so these meetings that we're having, as far as these open house meetings, are kind of the tail end, where we wanted to give people an opportunity, if they weren't able to make some of those many one-on-one meetings we had with various organizations and various companies across the island, that they could also attend here. And certainly there will be more opportunities to connect with our office as this policy advances. But we want to introduce the policy. We want to give you some context and some background, really talk about why benchmarking and transparency is an important part of our climate action and something the city is putting forward. And then hear from you. Really, really important to us is to hear, again, from folks who are going to be impacted by this policy, who have buildings, who have done this before or not, and really want to make sure they understand how it's going to work. You can go to the next slide. So some basic netiquette here, and just trying to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to introduce themselves. If you can please rename yourself in the Zoom with both your name and your organization, so other folks know who's talking and who's representing who. It's always very much welcome. We are trying to keep the conversation moving along to get you out of here as quickly as we can. But if you have something to say, please don't be afraid to speak up and just jump right in. It's a small enough group that that's a very manageable thing to do. As Matt said earlier, we are recording this, and the purpose is, again, just to share this message for those who weren't able to make it. And use the chat function. We do have folks on the team monitoring that, and so we're going to try to answer as many questions as we can. But again, please go ahead and speak up if you want to. As a matter of fact, I would welcome folks right now to take a minute if they want to. If there's something they really want to hear about from us, or if they've got a question before we even get into it, welcome some brief comments. And otherwise, if you go to the next slide, as people are unmuting, we also would love to make sure we understand not only the name of your organization, but kind of where you fit in. And so if you're not part of the CCSR team, which you can see the folks who have already designated themselves as such, maybe just tell us where you're coming from. And I guess with a group this small, it's probably just as easy to unmute and do so, but how are we looking? Are we getting some activity in the chat? And or
no, not quite yet, but updates on the names, and really appreciate folks for helping us with that. And again, excited to have some diverse interests, some repeat discussants, and potentially some new people.
We got a shy chat group here, Matt. I'm not going to pick on anybody.
Oh, they're starting to come in. There we go. Yeah.
Glad to see Hawaii State Energy Office represented. We appreciate that, Amanda. Ryan from Blue Planet, thank you for joining, and thank you for your support all along.
Hey, Julie.
Hey, guys.
Thinking we should let people continue to put in information in the chat. Much appreciated. And then if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to hand it back to Matt.
Sure, great. And thanks everyone for interacting with us, entertaining us to some extent as we hope to engage and have a lively discussion with you all. But as Ben mentioned, this conversation most recently has been several months in the making since the mayor released the city's first ever climate action plan on Earth Day of last year. And in June, actually, the city council formally adopted it as an important guiding policy document. But the conversation didn't start at that point in time. As you can see here, this notion around thinking about affordability, thinking about climate action in and of itself really started way back at the origins of the office, as we were going out there, engaging community, working with technical working groups, really engaging stakeholders and different sectors. And it elevated to one of the resilience actions within the city's resilience strategy itself. And some of you may have been participants in the earlier discussions from that that actually were held up as we all needed to pivot and be responsive to COVID health and safety matters at the start of the pandemic. As the community came back together to think about really advancing climate action, it was reminded and highlighted that really this notion of unlocking the potential of benchmarking, just having access to that information, was a really important opportunity to think about market-based programs and tools, but also partnerships to drive investments in community. And if you go to the next slide, one of the reasons that's so critical here, and we don't really need to stress that as we all are quite aware, is efficiency is important in its own right, but even more so here locally because of the high cost electricity. So it really is an outsized opportunity to drive improvement and to drive access through just tapping into the information, and again, unlocking that potential of transparency and partnering to act on that information. And if you go to the next slide, even though we tend to focus quite a bit on electricity costs, the notion of benchmarking, as Ben will talk about, is to look at all of the inputs, all of the resources, and how the operations of a facility, operations of a building perform. And I think more and more now with the Red Hill discussion in community, we know that perhaps today more than ever, we have to continue to preserve our precious water resources as there's some uncertainty around conservation needs or conservation opportunities moving forward. So if you go to the next slide, we wanted to also kind of just slow down and take a pulse as we connect with you all, just to hear how you think about sustainability and efficiency of your buildings, if you're an operator, owner, or even an occupant, and whether or not that is important for you in your respective positions. So we would encourage responses in the chat, or feel free to just unmute yourself quickly and chime in with your thoughts on that as well. Well, we'll let people internalize that. Oh, thank you, Eileen, for starting the roll there. Great, thanks everyone for getting those thoughts and considerations in. And if we go to the next slide, really getting into what it is that we're actually talking about and what this notion of benchmarking is, it really is based on this premise, right? That you can't manage what you don't measure. And we know sometimes it might take a little bit of effort to understand the situation and condition, but really having access to that information is so useful. We think about it in terms of a car's miles per gallon, or the performance or Energy Star rating on an appliance, right? It's very helpful if we have that same information for building operators and owners, land owners, facilities operators, and even tenants, right? This could be a great opportunity to share back that information, and then again, partner on ways to act upon that information. And it really is a proven and practical step that's taken in, that has already been taken and successfully borne fruit in jurisdictions all around the nation. So if we go on to the next slide, it may sound novel, but it really is pretty simple at its core, where you access and gather the information, put a little bit of that effort in to collect and baseline. That's the notion of benchmarking, looking at similar types of facilities, similar types of operations, different sizes of buildings, different inputs, and then thinking about how we can partner with you all to bring training and support to gather and collect that information. And then really it's all about turning it into actionable recommendations. And the more we can collect information and partner with you, the more we can empower and then think about even as us at the city as an actor in partnering on efficiency opportunities, retrofit programs, or the like moving forward. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, and Ben has a good image that we'll show a little bit later on. Those jurisdictions that have a history of doing this and doing it well successfully over several years at this point, not only have seen declines and marked improvement in building operations in terms of energy savings, but that results obviously in bill savings and utility savings. And there's additional other information and data around job creation and the opportunities to support sort of a next generation green workforce across the building sector. And we think that has a great opportunity. We know construction and building management were some of the cornerstone sectors through 2020 into 2021. And we don't see a slowdown of that in terms of climate action moving forward. Next slide, please. So earlier, we asked how important sustainability and efficiency were to you and or your clients. Here's just another way to think about how more efficient buildings can potentially even be more valuable. There's evidence out there in terms of either rental, sale, or occupancy rate with respect to the performance of a building. And Kevin from our team just put an additional link in the chat that documented this with evidence across markets across the US, looking at the value of Energy Star labeled commercial buildings in the United States, if that is something that is related to your operations or the clients that you work with. Next slide, please. And Mayor has really taken to heart the truth and reality of the challenge that so many community members, from residents to small businesses and everything in between, are faced with today in terms of rent and utility, and the amount of money that we're pumping into filling that gap with community members, and really thinking about ways that we can advance equity in all of our efforts. And the exciting thing is that benchmarking is one of those opportunities if we can do it well and do it right. And we think that the systems and the partnerships that we're already setting up can facilitate that ability to target direct additional outreach and resources to those that need a little bit more assistance to tap into it. And again, providing the kinds of detailed information that is actionable and validating the effort of collecting that information and sharing it with the city. If you move on to the next slide, before I hand it off to Ben here, again, this is really around that premise around supporting energy efficiency, supporting keeping costs down, supporting the market and its actors to be innovative and really sort of opening them up and cutting them loose to act upon this information, supporting the consumers that then need to occupy any of these spaces. And benchmarking is a really great entry point into tying together something like climate action, economic recovery, economic activity, and advancing energy equity. And we're glad that we have this opportunity to continue to discuss this with you further. And I'll hand it off to Ben.
Thanks, Matt. So we are going to do some repetition here, and the hope is to just make sure that we're sharing what we think this is about. Again, it's a pretty straightforward policy proposal, and the program has these key elements that you see here on the table. So we're talking about benchmarking a building and putting it into EPA's Energy Star Portfolio Manager. We're talking about a reporting system, which then comes back to you as a building owner and provides you kind of feedback on how you're doing and what some of your peers might be doing and where you sit in that whole placement, and also potential opportunities for savings. And then we're talking about transparency, which is to say very low resolution data, probably at the annual level, just showing, hey, these are the different buildings in the market, and across different building types, here's how they compare in terms of energy use intensity and water use to their peers, as a way to help drive the market and help incentivize folks to continue to seek continuous improvement. So if we can go to the next slide. We are asking you another poll, and that is just quick answers on what do you think, and this is, we're going to fill in some of this as we go forward, but what do you think are the most important elements for a successful benchmarking program? So you can see what the answers choices are here, and you can also add whatever else you might think is really important, but we'd love to hear it. If somebody wants to unmute and speak up and tell us loud and clear, you're also welcome to do that. All right, all of the above. I love it, Eileen. Thank you for being engaged on this thing. Anyone else? Okay, last chance. Not the last chance. We'll take more if you got it, but just trying to, again, give you opportunities to feedback. If anyone wants to unmute, please do so as we go forward. If we can go to the next slide. So this visualization really just talks about how widespread the practice of building benchmarking is across municipalities in North America. You can see cities and states that have policies. And if you pay attention to the details on this slide, what you'll see is that there's kind of an evolution in terms of how these programs have rolled out. One of the things that we think is very important, and Matt talked about the equity component of this program being very important, is the inclusion of multi-unit buildings. And so I think early benchmarking programs around the country, maybe circa 2009, 2010, often just looked at office, commercial, retail, and left out multi-unit residential. And so An important addition that we're making here and that other cities have made in more recent programs is to include multi-unit residential buildings. They happen to be one of the largest portions of the building stock here on Oahu, and so it's very important that we include them, but also because we can gain a lot of insight into how individual buildings and areas are performing in terms of energy burden, and then help shape and design programs and opportunities to get more resources to the folks that need them the most. Next slide. So who is already benchmarking locally? So you can start today. You can voluntarily benchmark your buildings, and a lot of folks do. This is one example is Kaimuki Middle School, and we're putting them in the spotlight because this is, I think, the first year that they benchmarked their building. Kudos to Hawaii State Energy Office for helping a lot of state facilities to get through this process. They've been doing great work. I think there's 34 K through 12 schools around the island that have already benchmarked, and then there's many, many other properties, both in the state and at the county level. So the city and county of Honolulu, in leading up to the introduction of this policy, has made a very serious effort to benchmark all of our buildings above 10,000 square feet, and we're very, very nearly complete with that process. We've learned a lot, and we're excited about it, and we've also already moved into the phase of implementing savings measures. So a lot going on in that regard. You see some of the savings figures cited here. If we go to the next slide, we can talk about who in the private sector is leading the way, and this is just a small sampling. There are many. I think Kevin may drop a link in the chat for you to kind of see who else is benchmarking around the island, but these examples here are show the management companies for different types of buildings that are being benchmarked already here on Oahu. So exciting to see that this is a leading practice, and we're excited to try to bring it more into the mainstream. Next slide. One of the other things that I think is very prevalent, if you look across some of the leading companies and whether they be management companies or property owners or developers, is that they all have a strong commitment to carbon reductions and to building energy performance. And so these are just some sampling quotes from some of either the corporate sustainability reports or other online mediums that have been offered up by some of these really, really important institutions around the island, talking about, and also, for those who work nationally, talking about what their practice looks like and why it's important to them. There's much more of this available. We just wanted to give our participants a sense that these practices are not at all uncommon, and they're not unfamiliar to a lot of our stakeholders. Next slide. So this is kind of some of the meat and potatoes of what we wanted to talk about tonight. So in the proposal that we are sending over to council, what is going to be covered and what's going to be involved in community-wide benchmarking. So the way it stands is we are going to be asking buildings over 100,000 square feet to complete their benchmarking by the end of the year in 2022. And so that would include all the use types you see here on the left. And then we anticipate a phase-in of smaller buildings down to 50,000 square feet in the second year, so by the end of 2023. And then completing and rounding out the sum of buildings that would be included under building benchmarking as proposed would be all buildings over 25,000 square feet of these types. The only exclusions in terms of use type is industrial buildings. And the reason for that is because industrial buildings have such diverse use that there's really very little benefit in comparing them to their peers, and there's not a lot of benefit to gain. And then sometimes there's some risks in terms of privacy that are more severe than with other building types. So next slide. And again, inviting people to unmute. I'll even take a pause if somebody has a question as we look at this next slide. Not hearing anyone getting to that unmute button, but these tables right here are a little wonky, I know, but what we're presenting here is just some building data that we get from the Real Property Assessment Division and other sources about what is our building stock and what does it mean to benchmark how many buildings are qualifying under these programs. And so if you look across what we're proposing, all buildings over 25,000 square feet on this top chart, you get a sense of what that composition is in terms of building type. And again, as I mentioned early on, condominiums and apartments, those multi-use buildings are really a huge, huge portion of the overall total, with office and hotel and retail and others filling in as you'd expect. The other thing you can see here on the bottom table is the percent of square footage and also the number of buildings that fold into, and these are estimates because it's just working on the best data we have, which is imperfect, but gets us a pretty good picture. But these estimates talk to the number of buildings that would be included on full compliance with the program. So moving to the next slide. One thing that we've heard a lot of, and again, we've engaged with a lot of stakeholders, BOMA, Building Operators and Maintenance Association. I'm going to get some of these acronyms wrong, but several other trade associations and building management organizations, as well as property management companies. Kamehameha Schools is one, CBRE, lots of them actually. But we've heard from them very loud and clear that they're supportive in general of this program, and they understand the need for us to reduce our emissions. They also understand that measuring is really a basic step in doing that, and that although some of the leaders might already measure, they can see where it would be advantageous to try to encourage the rest of the market to come along. The one thing people have said is, hey, we are all busy people. We don't have a ton of time, so we need to make sure this is as efficient as possible. And so the slide I'm showing you here today gets to the heart of one of the key questions, which is, if you're a building owner and you have 32 tenants, we are not asking you to go out and chase down bills from 32 tenants. We recognize how nearly impossible that would be, how difficult that would be as a chore for a building manager or owner. And we have been working with utilities, especially HECO, so that they can provide aggregated data. And so what we mean by that is demonstrated here. So traditionally, right, there's a bill, and the only person that can access the data on that bill is the one who pays it, right? But if you look on this, on the right of the slide where it says best practice, what we're talking about is the utility will be able to aggregate all these bills. They'll recognize what building we're referencing in the program, and they will aggregate all these bills together and give the building owner the total. So there's not any concerns about privacy for the individual owners, and the building owner only has to get this data straight from the utility and doesn't have to chase down their tenants. This is in most cases, if there's a building where there's only a few tenants, then it is a manual process, but that number is very limited, under 6 tenants kind of a thing, where you might have to chase down and get that information directly, and hopefully that would be much less of a task due to the small number of tenants you'd have to work with. Now, if we can go to the next slide, and again, I'm going to pause if anyone has a question. We talked about reporting in the early on. When I first took it over from Matt, there was that table that talked about benchmarking, reporting, and transparency. So here's an example of some reporting that happens back to facility owners from the city of Seattle, and we just offer you this as an example. We're still working out the details of what our reporting back will look like, and there will also be an annual report that's public in terms of how the overall system is doing and how beneficial the program is. But this would be like a scorecard that comes back to a building owner that says, hey, here's how you compare to your peers. Here's maybe some resources and opportunities, whether it be from Hawaii Energy or others, that could help you save energy and help you improve your water performance. BWS comes to mind there as well as Hawaii Gas potentially, and we're hopeful that this information just comes at the right time and comes in context with somebody who's measuring their building and stimulates action. So next slide. Another example from another jurisdiction, but something that we will likely have, is in the transparency component, where we would provide a map publicly to show who's performing and just some really, really basic metrics about what their performance looks like. So you can see referenced here is, in this case with Portland, it's a total greenhouse gas emissions and the relative performance versus the market, calling out a mid performer. Again, the idea is not to disclose information that would be inappropriate from a privacy standpoint, but just to provide really high level information about performance, so that both people in the market can make informed decisions about tenancy and real estate decisions and others. And then also that there's this notion of like, hey, we're all trying to do our part, and we're demonstrating how people are coming along, and then finding the resources to help them move ahead. Next slide. Okay, so this is a very important slide. This is what we're proposing as a timeline. So we have been doing a lot of outreach. As a matter of fact, as Matt mentioned, the outreach started before the pandemic, but it was put on hold. And it resumed again in October of last year, where we reached out to a lot of stakeholders individually between then and now. And then these open house meetings that you see referenced, we're in the second one, and towards the end of January. We expect the bill to go to council very shortly and get to them and be introduced, hopefully in February. And so that's the timeline that we anticipate. With a smooth process at council, it could be out as soon as April. And we would then issue what is called a covered buildings list, which is the comprehensive list of buildings that are required to benchmark under the program. So the first covered buildings list would cover buildings over 100,000 square feet, but we would also make available the data for those required to benchmark in subsequent years as well. So the 50,000 square foot and 25,000 square foot buildings. And then by December of 22, that first round of just under 500 buildings over 100,000 square feet would be on track to meet their first reporting deadline. Taking a pause, people can unmute. Questions are welcome. Some review here. No reason to stop. There's no reason other not start today. So don't need to wait. These tools are readily available. If anyone hasn't already gotten our FAQ for the benchmarking program, please reach out to us and we'll make sure to send it to you. It is also on our website. I don't know, Kevin, if you can, I didn't have this queued up, but if you can drop the energy program website into the chat so folks could also go to that and gain any of these resources they might not have. And then I'm seeing a question in the chat. Can you post the city's facility benchmarking report? Absolutely, we can. We are still completing that, as I said, but that will be up in a matter of weeks as we finish it out. And Julie Younger, thank you for that question. Much appreciated. So benchmarking your building. Visit Portfolio Manager. Here's a link. There are tons and tons of resources about how to get this done. Right, and then we're talking about connecting with Hawaii Energy, looking at rebates, checking with Board of Water Supply to see if they have rebates, whether they be existing or new programs that are just about to come out. Blue Planet Foundation and our friend Ryan Nakazaki is on the call, has set up some, is creating some free trainings with Hawaii Energy that will be coming out soon. Ryan, if you want to unmute and give us a quick blurb on what you guys are working on, it'd be much appreciated.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Ryan from Blue Planet Foundation. We're really excited to partner with Hawaii Energy. They're a really strong partner in, offering trainings for benchmarking using Portfolio Manager. And so we're really excited to support some of the work that the city and county is doing on benchmarking and offering free training on Portfolio Manager to benchmark office and multifamily buildings. And some of these trainings are going to be happening in the month of March. So hoping to share more information in a flyer, and we'll be having a website set up and ready to go for folks to register if they're interested. We're also coordinating and offering financial incentives for energy audits for those who successfully complete and benchmark one of their buildings. And so really excited to be offering that as well. And so if you're interested, happy to connect afterwards and share more information.
Thank you, Ryan. Really great information, and we appreciate your efforts to get support out to community ahead of the program. So this is the sum of what we wanted to present to you, but we would really, really love to hear from folks on the call, whether it be questions about the program or timing or anticipation of future details. I think if there's anything on the slides themselves, and if somebody would like us to go back, now's a great time. Otherwise, we can turn off the screen share and just talk story with each other for a few minutes before we cut you all loose and let you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Well, Ben, this is Eileen Peppard. I was curious, what do you foresee the privacy issues with sharing the data transparency? You shared Portland. I've looked at Denver. They share it. It's for the whole building. So is that a privacy issue?
So we do not anticipate any real privacy issues. I think it's a great question, Eileen. And again, the way that we're addressing that is because the privacy issue is at multiple levels, right? Really, like anyone outside of the one who pays that individual bill would not normally have access to the data. And so we want to preserve that level of privacy. And the way to do that is aggregating the accounts. And so again, with HECO, we've had specific conversations about their ability to aggregate the data and then enable benchmarking to take place. And so in the case of 15 or 20 buildings all aggregated, to get into the weeds on it a little bit, the rule of thumb is if one of those accounts is more than 50% of the usage, then we wouldn't actually share it. But as long as there's more than, say, 4 and not one of them is greater than 50%, then it's pretty well documented that privacy is preserved in that case. So it's well addressed. I think the reason we bring it up is because we're very cognizant that it's a concern, and we want to make sure people understand that we're paying attention to it.
Right. And I see it as a consumer protection method by, if I was going to go and rent an office space, I would want to, maybe shop around and look at different buildings and see which ones are more efficient. That might cut my bottom line costs.
So thank you for that. Great point, and definitely something we are very conscious of as well. I notice also there's some questions in the chat. I'm going to go back to the timeline slide for Will, who asked for it, if we can. Thank you. There we go. So Will, we expect to introduce the ordinance late February, and we expect it to be at council for a couple of months. But obviously that process really depends on how things go and what happens in terms of testimony and hearings and what council decides to do with it. So hopefully that answers the question. Quiet bunch here.
There was an additional question from Julie, and thanks, Julie, for bringing attention to the other legislative session that just kicked off last week, Wednesday. I believe today was the final deadline for bill introduction. So certainly, like so many out in community, we are similarly diving into the myriad of introductions and getting a sense of where some of those things might go. So if it wasn't already on our list, thanks for flagging SB 2590 relating to benchmarking, relating to energy efficiency, I should say, but on the topic of benchmarking as well.
Okay, I'm gonna let there be a couple more minutes of silence here, and then we would love to. If we don't hear from you, we'd love to give you your evening back, and we again really just thank everybody for showing up, for sharing a few thoughts and concerns, and then we just encourage you to please reach out to us if you want to follow up, if you have additional questions, if you want to look over that FAQ and then maybe come back with more detailed questions. All of that is welcome. We really want to hear from everybody involved and appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Ben, Eileen, again, I just have one quick question, and the gas company might not like this one. Is there plans to require electrification of gas appliances?
We do not have plans to require electrification of gas appliances. We are very eager and paying attention to what Hawaii Gas is intending to do with regards to renewable gas, but I wouldn't propose to say anything about that. So
No,
great question.
Thanks for the question, Eileen. But yeah, I mean, the discussion tonight is strictly on the building data and how that can be a tool to help us think about energy efficiency.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Okay, last call. Here we go. Looks like we're going to conclude. Mahalo to everybody. Really appreciate it. We will post the recording on the website. Look forward to hearing from you with questions, comments, concerns, whatever it might be. And have a great night. Aloha.